Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Racha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Micah, the 5th chapter. And in Micah 5, it's mainly prophetic, right? It deals with a couple of different instances in prophecy, mainly concerning the deliverance of the nation of Israel and the birth of Yahushai, right? The prophecy about Yahushai and what role he would play. Now, there are a couple of verses in here that are, written in a, you might call it a dark saying or in a symbolic form, but it's the message is still along the lines of the same message throughout the scriptures, right? Remember that the different prophets received visions that may have differed in appearance, but all signified the same thing at the end of the day. And so once you understand what that message is, right, the underlying core concept of it, you'll see that majority of these prophets really all prophesied about the same thing when it comes to prophecy. So this is the book of Micah chapter 5, verse 1. Now gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. Now here, Micah, remember that Micah in his time prophesied both against or to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, okay? And during his ministry, you had the northern kingdom, right, the time when the Assyrians came against the northern kingdom, like besieged them and actually took them captive. So when he says here, gather thyself in troops, right, that's like an alarm or a warning to prepare, right, to gather your men of war, gather your armies, O daughter of troops, which is just referring here to Israel. Okay, and the reason he says, "O daughter of troops," when you look at the scriptures, right, there are instances where you'll see it's mentioning the daughter of Zion, right, or the daughter of Israel, or so on and so forth. So that daughter of is just like it's almost like the suffix "ite," right, pertaining to. And in this case, he's saying that because of Israel being acquainted, okay, so often with wars and so on and so forth, being embroiled in those situations. So by calling us the daughter of troops, it's not really, anything of great significance. But the point that Micah is making here is prepare, right? Gather your troops and get ready, because he hath laid siege against us. Okay, and here this is referring to the Assyrians when they came against the northern kingdom. Now, they ended up coming also at a latter time under the reign of a different king, right? Because you had Shalmaneser V, which was the king of Assyria at the time when they came against the northern kingdom. And after his reign, and after he died, and his when you look into history, his brother Sargon, after he died, you had Sennacherib, which was the one that came against the southern kingdom. Okay. Now, both of them did, the Assyrians besieged both the northern and the southern kingdom, once again, at different times. However, as Micah goes on to mention here, as a result, right, they're going to lay siege. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. And what this signifies is that they would conquer, or they would take over here the northern kingdom, right? As it mentions, when you look up the word judge, it goes into a ruler, right? So in this instance, the king of the of the northern kingdom. There are times, especially during the period of the divided kingdom, where the term Israel is referencing the northern kingdom, and then you would often see Judah, which would represent the southern kingdom, or the tribes that were separated under those two umbrellas. Now, we know this is referring to the northern kingdom because when the Assyrians besieged the southern kingdom, they did not take over, right? They weren't able to smite, as it says, the judge with a rod upon the cheek. Now, the reason this signifies dominion or taking over is when you have a nation that goes against another nation, in order for them to be at a point where your adversary has access to your king or your judge or your ruler to be able to smite them or, harm them or humiliate them, this signifies that your nation lost, right? It was its defenses were broken through and the enemy prevailed against you to the point where they've been able to capture your ruler. Okay, and this happened to the northern kingdom, which the king at the time was Hoshea. Verse 2, but thou, right? So now you see here, there's this contrast between the subject of who Micah is addressing here, right? So he mentions here, prepare, and because they've laid siege, or they're going to lay siege against you, and they're going to take over the northern kingdom. But, right, thou, in reference to the southern kingdom here, in terms of you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, right? So though you're not, let's say the biggest city, right, of the various cities of Judah, yet, and then here he's going into a prophecy concerning Judah, right? So yet out of thee, so out of Bethlehem, shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel. And this is referring to Yahushua, the Messiah, because as we know, Yahushua was born in Bethlehem. Okay, so this was a prophecy saying that out of Bethlehem shall he come forth that is to be ruler in Israel. And the ruler, the ultimate ruler or king of Israel under the Most High is Yahushua, right? Whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. And this is because though this prophecy is about a future time when the Messiah or Yahushua would come on the scene, Yahushua has actually been there since the beginning of creation, right? We know the Most High far, he goes way before creation, but creation starts with the Most High because he was the author of creation, right? But he first created Yahushua. So Yahushua from that point, before even our inception, has been there and will always be there for all of eternity. That's why I mentioned his goings forth, his existence being from old, and from everlasting. Verse 3, therefore will he give them up until then. And who's the he? The Most High. And who is going to be given up? Israel. So for a period of time, Israel is going to be given up until the time. And by given up, it means we would be in a state of being subject or abandoned / forsaken. And what that would lead to is us being under the different nations, right? Serving captivity under them, being weak before them. Because after the time of the reign of King David and King Solomon, and leading to the ending of the reign of the two kingdoms, right? The northern and the southern kingdom, we were completely subject onto the nations just continually, since then, regardless of whether some ruled us with a harsher dominion than others, we were still given up and subject onto them, right? So we would be in this condition until the time that she which travaileth hath brought forth. And the she which travaileth is, there's two layers to that, right? Ultimately, the she which travaileth represents the nation of Israel. But it also represents Mary, which was the physical woman that was actually travailing, with birth or in birth with Yahushua, the Messiah. So until the time of Yahushua coming on the scene, right, being brought forth or birthed by Mary, we would be given up. Okay, and when you go to I pulled this up in the NLT. See, yeah, NLT Isaiah 49:8. but I'm gonna see if I can find the blue letter version of it, or the KJV. I said blue letter, KJV. It says here, "Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, in an acceptable time have I heard thee, and in a day of salvation have I helped thee, and I will preserve thee and give thee for a covenant of the people, to establish the earth, to cause to inherit the desolate heritages." So what this means was, at an acceptable time, right? At a certain time, the Lord would hear us and help us. Okay, in the day of salvation, he would help us. And this began when Yahushua came on the scene. Because prior to that, Israel had been in a downward spiral of worshiping idols, committing iniquities, being wrapped up in our sins, to the point where we got separated from our power, and we just got worse and worse and worse, to the point where you had Israelites that didn't even know they were Israelites living like heathens. So we were just going downhill. But the turning point, or the acceptable time, was when the Lord decided, okay, it's now time to start changing things and turning things around by sending my son Yahushua back. And the Apostle Paul referenced this here in 2 Corinthians 6:2, right? "For he saith, I have heard thee in a time accepted, and in the day of salvation have I succored thee. Behold, now is the accepted time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." So how did the Apostle Paul know that? Because during, well, a little prior to his ministry, was that same time period when the Lord sent Yahushua, which signified that that was the acceptable time. That was the time of salvation. And what I mean by that is not the time when we would be delivered per se, but the time when our deliverance would begin. Because by Yahushua coming down and being that sacrifice and ultimately bringing us the truth, right? The true doctrine, the doctrine of life, we would now have a way onto salvation, a path to where we would no longer have to be given up onto the enemy, right? Hopelessly. So going back to Micah, right? 5:3, we were given up for a time, right? But things started to turn around when she that travaileth hath brought forth, when Yahushua came on the scene. Okay, and at that point, or starting at that point, the remnant of his brethren, right? Now, the brethren of Yahushua are who? Israelites, because Yahushua is an Israelite. So in other words, the remnant of Israel shall return onto the children of Israel. And that remnant, as we know, the remnant is a term that's applied to the believers, and it's used as a remnant because it's a small number in comparison to the rest of the nation. Okay, so starting at the time when Yahushua came on the scene, going forth from then, even all the way up until now, was when the doctrine of truth, right, the completeness of it started to be taught, and through that, the believers, whether in Israel, knowing they were Israelites, or whether scattered amongst the different nations, okay, started to hear this word and ultimately to turn back, okay, to be unified. And that chain reaction, you could say, so to speak, has been in effect even up until now. Verse 4, "And he shall stand," still talking about Yahushua, the Messiah, "he shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord." So now the analogy here, it's likening Yahushua onto a shepherd, right? And just as a shepherd stands, to protect and to guide and feeds his sheep, that would be the role that Yahushua would play. And he started right with that by first teaching, right? Feeding. What did he tell Peter? "If you love me, feed my lambs," right? So Yahushua, being the shepherd, started by feeding, right, the sheep of the Lord in the spirit, by this word, by this truth. But he did that, as it says, in the strength of the Lord Yahweh. And that's why he always mentioned, "My will is to do that of the Heavenly Father," right? Or my meat is to basically do the will of the Lord, of the Most High. As it says, in the majesty of the name of the Lord Yahweh, his God. So through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Yahushua came on the scene and was that shepherd, and still is, right? Who started to feed us and continues to feed us in the spirit, right? With knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, the things that are needful for us, like a shepherd does for his actual sheep. And they shall abide, right? Who's that they? Israel, starting with the elect. And abide here, I'm gonna pull this up in the Hebrew, but it basically means that we're gonna have rest, right? The Lord, through the Lord doing that, we would have rest. So as it says, to dwell, to remain, to be inhabited, right? To marry, to give and dwelling to, right? So we would eventually gain that peace or that rest, as the scriptures and other prophecies mention, that none shall make them afraid, right? They shall dwell safely. So this would all come through Yahushua, which is why, right, this was a turning point. Okay. So as it says here, for now shall he be great unto the ends of the earth, right? Because Yahushua would attain that glory and that rank and that honor, as the scriptures tell you, right? He had a name that no man knew, or no man could attain, but he himself, right? So he shall be great unto the ends of the earth. That's both in the physical sense, right? In the sense of space and time. So throughout all of existence, Yahushua is going to be known, and also throughout time. All right. Verse 5, and this man, still referring to Yahushua, right? That's the subject matter, the Messiah. And this man shall be the peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men, right? So Yahushua is going to be that peace or that defense. Let's look into the word peace over here. And remember, this is prophetic, right? Shalom, as it says here, safety. Okay, completeness, welfare, peace. Peace from what? From war. So when we go back to Micah chapter 5, verse 5, and this man, Yahushua, is going to be that safety or that peace when the Assyrian shall come into our land. So this is all in future tense. So this verse here isn't dealing with necessarily when the ancient Assyrians came against us, right? Even though that did happen, and the Lord sent the angel, right, to slay the 185,000 of the troops of Sennacherib. But the difference is, during that time, right, the Assyrians, when they came against the southern kingdom, they weren't able to invade the land, obviously, right? The Lord raised up an angel to defend them. But when they came against the northern kingdom, obviously they had the upper hand and they were able to triumph over them. But as we go into the next verse, it'll prove even more, how or why this isn't referencing the time of the ancient Assyrians, but rather a future Assyrian. Okay, and we know that in the scriptures, when the scriptures refer to the Assyrians, right, in prophecy, this is tied to or related to Babylon and Esau, Edom. Okay, so when the Assyrian, right, when Esau or Babylon shall come into our land, and this is dealing with to come against Israel, because when an enemy comes into your land, why are they really there, or who are they really there for? The people, right? That signifies them coming against the people. And when he shall tread in our palaces, right, to make his way, to invade once again, to try and get access, whether for captivity or to harm the people or the inhabitants of the land, then shall we raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. And when you go into, let's start with the word raise. When it says we shall raise against them, really what it means is the Lord is going to raise up, okay, seven shepherds and 8 principal men, which these are not talking about actual, like a specific actual 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. It's symbolic for a defense. Okay, like we read in Isaiah 59 and 19, that when the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against them. Okay, and there's other precepts that go into the Lord defending, okay, Israel when the enemy would come in, all right, in times of prophecy. But looking at this word raise, right, really it should be quam, but it says to raise, arise, rise, stand up, to arise in a hostile sense, right, to become powerful. So when this Assyrian, right, in prophecy, which is once again synonymous with Esau, Edom, right, with Babylon, when they would come against us, against Israel, the Lord is going to raise up, or he's going to make powerful against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. And like I said, there's nowhere in prophecy that mentions that you're going to have 7 actual shepherds or 7 men that are going to stand up against Esau when he comes against Israel. Okay, this is symbolic because, one, when you deal with 7, that's going into a completeness. But you notice you have this 7 and then 8, right? And when you deal with like the verbiage of ancient Israel, oftentimes when you would have a use of a number followed by another number afterward that was greater, it was signifying coming to a completeness and then going over, right? One example, which I believe Amos used this quite often. I'll just pull it up real quick. I think it might be in Amos either 1, 2, or 3, but it mentions actually, let me search it. Transgressions. Yeah, okay, there it is. So Amos chapter 1 verse 3, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they have threshed Gilead with threshing instruments of iron. So this use of for 3 and for 4, or for 3 even for 4, it's like a use. It's like a it's to say like having reached the fullness of it and then gone over. Okay, here of course it's being used in a negative sense, but in Micah it's more so in the positive sense, right? Meaning that the Lord would raise up a complete defense, all right, and then some against Esau when he comes against Israel. Now, a shepherd, when you deal with sheep, for example, a shepherd is the first line of defense, right? When you have adversaries, whether it's a lion or a bear, right, or a wolf, a shepherd is the first one that sort of comes in between, right, and protects and defends that sheep. And when you go into the word principal men, right, it goes into like the princes. And so when you deal with the in the sense of actual people, when there's trouble, right, or there's an invasion or whatever the case is, the princes or the rulers or the principal men are the ones that are looked to for that defense, right? They are the first ones that are notified, hey, this is what's going on, what do we do? And they'll say, okay, have the people do this or do that or whatnot. So the shepherds and the principal men, right, are likened onto that defense that the Lord is going to raise up when this Assyrian, or when Esau comes against Israel. And quick precept for this, because then then we'll go into verse 6. But precept for this is, let me see which one I want to get. I got a couple on here. I guess we could start with Isaiah. Oops, nope. Guess we ain't doing that. I'll pull it up on the side though. Isaiah 59 and 19. But when you go into the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter and the last verse, right, it says here, and the dragon was wroth with the woman. And who's the dragon? Esau. Ultimately, was wroth with the woman, which is Israel, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. Now, this is after, right? When you read in this here, this is after the woman had to flee into the wilderness, right, of Africa, and then being sent to America and so on. But as it says here, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. There goes that term remnant again, which keep the commandments of God and have the what? The testimony of Yahushua. So that goes to show you this will be a future time when this dragon would come against the remnant of the woman, which represents the remnant of Israel that have what? The testimony of Yahushua, which is this truth, and are keeping, right, the commandments of the Lord, what he has commanded us to do to the best of our ability. So when this would happen, once again, now let's go to Isaiah 59:19. So shall they fear the name of the Lord Yahweh from the west, and his glory from the rising of the sun, when the enemy shall come in like a flood. The spirit of the Lord Yahweh, then, and there's that flood, right, which is like the, as we mentioned here, treading in our palaces, right, and coming into our land. The spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against him. Okay, so here it's worded as that, a standard, which it would be like that defense, whether it's spiritual power, right, whether it's the angels, you know, whether it's whatever means the Lord decides, it would be a defense that would be raised up against the adversary. Okay, so verse 6, it says, and they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword. And when you go into the word waste, you gotta really look through it, right? Because when you go into the word waste, majority of the synonyms you see here are like to pasture, to feed, to tend. But the Lord is not going to raise up a standard or a defense to go and feed the Assyrians or to feed the enemy. That doesn't make sense. Okay. So, but when you look into the actual use of this word, because it has different meanings here, right, based on the context. And when you look into the one of the uses of the word here in relation to the actual verse we're reading about here in Micah, it's referring to consume, right, in a hostile sense. It says here figuratively, to depasture, to consume. And then it quotes Micah 5:5, which I think it really should be Micah 5:6. But it says, they shall eat up / or in parentheses, waste the land of Assyria with the sword, right? And that's what we're reading here in Micah 5:6. And they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword. You don't feed people or take care of them with a sword. So this is in a hostile sense, right? Meaning the Lord is going to raise up this defense, right? That's what the 7 shepherds and 8 principal men represent. A defense is symbolic, and it's written in a dark saying of that. But that's what the Lord is going to do. He's going to raise that against the Assyrians when they shall come. And that defense, through that defense, right, they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword. So we know that going back in history, when the Assyrians came against Israel, we had 2 accounts, right? When they came against the northern kingdom was not able to defend themselves against them. They were subject to them. Okay, so we know this can't be talking about that. When they came against Judah, yes, the Lord had an angel defend Israel or Judah against them, but the angel or the defense the Lord raised at that time did not destroy the land of Assyria. Sennacherib fled back to his homeland, and the Assyrians continued in power for some time until they were taken down by the Neo-Babylonians and the Medes. So we know this didn't happen. Verse 6 didn't happen in history, but it will happen in this time. Okay, when the Lord raises up this defense against Esau, through that is going to lead to the actual wasting of this land with the sword. And what is the sword of the Lord? The sword of the Lord is those nuclear missiles, right? There's a precept that mentions, my sword shall be bathed in heaven. It shall come down upon Idumea. Okay, so it's going to be the missiles, but also the lasers from the chariots of the angels. So they're going to waste the land of Assyria with the sword and the land of Nimrod. And what is the land of Nimrod? The land of Nimrod is Babel or Babylon. And both of those cities or lands are attributed to America, okay, or modern day Babylon, which is like or is linked, I should say, to Esau, Edom, because he is the one who is in power he's the heathen nation that is in power at this point of Babylon, right? Or the prophecy of Babylon taking place. Well, and when I say that, I mean all the prophecies relating to the Babylon the Great. So as it says here, in the land of Nimrod, in the entrances thereof, right, which just signifies that Babylon and Assyria, which is talking about the same place, modern day Babylon, America, is going to be destroyed. It's going to be wasted. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian. So this is how he, being Yahushai, is going to deliver us, being Israel, from the Assyrian, Esau, Edom. Okay, he's going to do it by raising up a defense, and through that defense, he's going to destroy, okay, Babylon. So as it says, thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. And this coming into our land and treading within our borders signifies them coming against the people. Because once again, when an enemy comes into your land to invade your land, or when they come to tread within your borders, that is them coming against the people of the land. And when they would come to do that, the Lord will lift up a defense which will lead to their destruction. Now, in in terms of taking this and translating this into like real life events, right? What does it actually look like? What does it actually look like for the Lord to lift up a defense and then have through that defense a destruction of Babylon, right? Or this future Assyria? Well, we know first and foremost the Lord raised up the prophets, okay, which would start by teaching, prophesying against this devil, right, and also warning our people, which would be firstly, that's that first line, because that's happening through who? Through this man, right? Who is our peace, and who is that? Yahushai. Okay, and by the prophets being raised up and teaching, that triggers that chain reaction. Because what is the physical manifestation of prophecy, right? We have the prophets that are teaching, the elect hear it, they get sealed, and then you have the enemy come in against them, and then the Lord lifts up that standard, be it in the form of spiritual power, be it in the form of sending angels down, right? Daniel, the 12th chapter mentions that, okay? But by the Lord lifting up that defense and sending those angels and all the other means that he uses, the elect of the nation of Israel would be preserved when Esau, Edom would make his, as we read in Revelation 12, would make his campaign, you could say, to destroy or to come against, to harm the people of the Lord. I have one more precept here on that. This is Revelation 20:9. It says, and they went on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city, right? Which is talking about the land, but also the people. So when Esau, because this is dealing with Esau, right? When he would come against the people of the Lord, the camp of the saints are Israelites, which is also like them, what does it say, treading within the borders? And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them, right? What is that? That is a defense that is raised at the point of this devil coming to harm the people of the Lord. Okay, so you see how Micah 5:5 and 5:5-6, this prophecy is nothing new. It's just worded in a tricky way, but it's the same thing that the other prophets have mentioned. It's the same thing we're reading of in these other precepts that I quoted, Revelation, right, Isaiah, and various other precepts that go into the Lord lifting up a standard or raising a defense or protecting, even in 2nd Ezra 16. Right, protecting his chosen or his people when this enemy or Esau comes in, either like a flood or a madman, okay, or as the Assyrian invading us. It's the same thing, right? Just worded in a different way. So going down to verse 7. So basically, or hopefully that makes sense, right? In verse 5 and 6, it's really describing when the enemy, which is the Assyrian in prophecy being Esau, Edom, rises up to come against the people of the Lord is going to lift up that standard or that protection or that defense, which is likened onto the seven shepherds and 8 principal men. And there, or through that defense, Israel would be protected, but also Esau would be destroyed, or the land, as it says, of Assyria, which is Babylon, would be destroyed. And that is the way that the Lord is going to deliver us from the Assyrian when he comes against us. Verse 7, and the remnant of Jacob shall be in the midst of many people, as a dew from the Lord Yahweh, as the showers upon the grass, that tarrieth not for man, nor waiteth for the sons of men. Now, the remnant of Jacob, once again, there goes that term remnant again, shall be in the midst of many people. Verse 9, or where is it? Verse 9 and verse 8 pretty much explain themselves, right? In the sense that you're going to have the Lord put a spirit upon Israel. Okay, both the elect, which are the true remnant, and also the non-elect of the nation of Israel. But it's going to be in 2 different instances, right? Because when it says here, they shall be in the midst of many people, which are these nations, right? As a dew from the Lord, the dew is like mist, okay? Or as showers upon the grass, that tarrieth not for man. It's comparing the unstoppable wrath or damage that would be done by Jake, right? The remnant of Jacob is likening that onto dew or onto rain that comes down. Because when it's raining, or when it's going to rain, you can't stop that. You can't really do anything about it except either don't leave your house or take an umbrella with you, right? But just like rain comes down upon grass, and as it says, it tarrieth not for man. I mean, we have exceptions, right, where the Lord controls it. But, if it's going to rain and it starts raining, you may be 10 minutes from your house, right? The rain is not going to stop and say, okay, you know what? I'll wait till you get home and then I'm going to come down. No, it's going to rain when it's going to rain. You're not going to be able to stop it. And it's likening that to how how Jake is going to be in this time. This is prophetic, right? Micah 5 and 7. This is prophetic. How Jake is going to be in this time. Basically, you're not going to be able to stop us. As it says, nor waiteth for the sons of men. And the remnant of Jacob shall be among the Gentiles, which are these heathens, in the midst of many people, as a lion among the beasts of the forest. So if you have a visual, there's a reason a lion is known as the king of the jungle. If you have a visual of a lion in the midst of different beasts, it is the most dangerous, you could say, or prominent within them. And then it goes even further as to, clarify the point here. It says here, as a young lion, so a lion in his youth or in his prime, with his full mane, among the flocks of sheep, who, if you have a sheep pen and you open the gate and let a lion in there, exactly what's going to happen is what's written here. Both treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and none can deliver. None of those sheep are going to be able to deliver themselves from the lion. And this is how Israel is going to be likened onto in the midst of these heathens. Now, the reason I said this is in 2 forms is you're going to have the non-elect, right, of our people, primarily here in Babylon, but also other parts of the world. But primarily here in Babylon, the Lord is going to put a spirit of wrath or being roused up upon the non-elect Israelites, right, of Jacob. And they're also going to be getting violent and dangerous out here in, these race wars, these class wars, when all hell breaks loose, going wild. But you're also going to have the time when the Lord blesses his true remnant with power. Okay. And Lord willing, we be of that number. We're also going to be getting busy. But this really applies to that true remnant. And the reason is because it mentions here, right, that none can deliver. Now, when the non-elect, okay, of the nation of Israel start, getting busy out here, they're still going to die, right? They're still going to be getting mowed down, even though they're going to be doing damage and wilding out on Esau and them. at the end of the day, they're still going to be suffering judgment. But when the Lord blesses his elect, right, his true remnant with that power, from the time of Jacob's trouble to defend themselves, up until the time of being changed and becoming gods. Because remember, after the elect are delivered, we still got to come down, right, in the midst of the war and subject these nations under the Lord. Okay, so that power that the Lord is going to give to his elect, nobody's going to be able to be delivered or deliver themselves from them. Okay, as it likens them onto a young lion who treadeth down and teareth in pieces, and nobody can deliver. Because once again, if you look at the scene of Jacob's trouble, yeah, you're going to have Jake wilding out, but you're also going to have Esau out here with their guns. You're going to have these troops out here, and they're going to be mowing down Jake. Okay, so that wouldn't be a 100% scene of none being able to deliver out of their hands. But when you have the elect with spiritual power, that's a scene where it's like a true young lion in the midst of sheep that nobody can actually deliver. Like they're going to be powerless before this remnant when the Lord blesses us with that power. And that's also likened on to Micah 4 and the last verse, where it mentions the Lord likening Israel onto like an ox with hooves of iron, treading upon the nations which are likened onto the sheaves on the threshing floor. Verse 9, thine hand shall be lifted up upon thine adversaries, and all thine enemies shall be cut off. Okay, and that is that is going to happen when the Lord raises us up with power. So our enemies are either going to be subject, right, brought into captivity, made subject, or they're going to be destroyed. No other option. And the enemies are these other nations. You can read about that in Psalms, the 83rd chapter. Verse 10, and it shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord Yahweh, that I will cut off thy horses out of the midst of thee, and I will destroy thy chariots. Now, from verse 10 on down, it might sound as though the subject matter is still Israel, but it's not. This is actually referring on to, in this case, Esau, right, or our enemies, because, as it says, or I should say the heathens, because it even clarifies that on the last verse. But you have to actually, put some reasoning to this, right? In context of what we've read up until verse 10, it's talking about the Lord defending Israel, the Lord giving Israel power, and these other nations, these Gentiles, not being able to deliver themselves from us. And then in verse 10, why would it now say that it shall come to pass in that day, the Lord is then going to destroy the horses out of Israel, or destroy the chariots out of Israel? That wouldn't really make sense now. Okay. The horses and the chariots represent, once again, like the defense, the means of, transportation, all of these things, right? Armaments, you could say, just like he did with ancient Egypt. Because typically those chariots, those horses and chariots are mainly used in like a time of war, for example, right? They're also used for other means, right? But when you're when you're on the battlefield and you're going against another nation, you have your chariots, you have your horses, you have your elephants, you have your footmen, your foot soldiers, all of that. Here it's saying in that day, when the Lord blesses us with that power, when we're able to be lifted up, having the upper hand against our enemies and cutting them off, the Lord is going to be with us, and he's going to cut off their horses, right, and their chariots. And I will cut off the cities of thy land and throw down all thy strongholds, right? And that's, once again, primarily going to be in Babylon, but not exclusive to Babylon, because these other heathen nations, they're also going to be subject to that. Verse 12, and I will cut off witchcrafts out of thine hand, and thou shalt have no more soothsayers. Well, in Isaiah 47, when it also goes into the downfall of Babylon, does it not mention that? Stand now with thine enchantments, which thou hast labored from thy youth, roughly paraphrasing. In in Revelation 18, it describes how within her was found the souls of men. And the Lord said what? He's going to cut all that off. He's going to destroy all that corruption, all that pollution. It's all going to be broken down. I mean, there's going to be no other way because, for one, this place is going to be turned into a lake of fire. And all the other places around the world that practice this, whether it's idols, or worshiping other gods, all of that is going to be brought down and broken down. Thy graven images, right, their idols, also will I cut off, and thy standing images out of the midst of thee, and thou shalt no more worship the work of thine hands. See, and once again, the Lord is going to do this. You can think of this really on a holistic level, because this is going to be obviously, once again, in context of the verses we read up above, applying to Babylon and these heathens, but also Israel, because in that time, no longer are Israelites going to be worshiping, idols or images or other deities or gods or anything of that sort. As a matter of fact, nobody will. Verse 14, and I will pluck up thy groves out of the midst of thee, so will I destroy thy cities. This in that day being the day of our deliverance, how would this make sense to apply to Israel, right? In the sense of the Lord destroying our cities. And verse 15 basically makes it clear, right? And I will execute vengeance. So everything we just read up above here from verse 5 on down is an example of the vengeance the Lord is going to execute, right? But now it's attributed, it tells you the target. And I will execute vengeance in anger and fury upon the heathen, such as they have not heard. And that's why it'll be a time like never before. And that brings us to the end of the book of Micah, the 5th chapter. So Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.